You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 CBS Radio.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. Our program this week has a lot of useful information. One of our guests is an expert in public policy, which affects your daily life more than you can possibly imagine. Another is an academic who has been willing to push back against the academy in defense of empowering her students. The third is a scrupulous researcher who has uncovered explosive facts about the sexual exploitation industry, facts which have led to major changes in public consciousness. But first, we need to look inside the headlines. There were at least two, competing headlines for going inside them this week. One of them, the Elliot Rodgers shooting spree in Santa Barbara, I'm going to deal with at the end of the program in Fighting Words. But I had to go inside the headlines that blared from the tabloids all this past week as one walked along the streets of New York City. The New York Post, which of course is a really scuzzy yellow sheet owned by Rupert Murdoch, and the Daily News, which is a wingman to the New York Post, both of them blazoned headlines saying, "First Lady of New York says, I was a bad mom. I was a neglectful mother." So my teeth are now grinding as I walk along the street, as opposed to just grinding at home when I'm watching television and reading newspapers. So let's go inside this and look at the backstory. They were referring to Chirlane McCray, who is now the First Lady of New York, who is married to Bill de Blasio, who won by a handy landslide as a progressive Democratic mayor. And they have two children, Chiara and Dante, she's in her early 20s and he's in his late teens. Terrific children. Chirlane McCray is the first passionately progressive African-American feminist poet, former speechwriter, former political activist, still political activist, who we've ever had as First Lady of New York. She is tiny. She's like 4'11", my height, which is another reason for me to love her. Married to a man who is 17 feet high, so they look like Mutt and Jeff. And he is Italian-American. And they have this family, and they're who they are. Now, in a 6,000-word piece in New York Magazine, written by Lisa Miller, a very good piece, basically, profile on McCray, there was one small paragraph, 101 words only, in which she said what every mother who's ever honest would say about certain moments when you have your first child. She says, I was 40 years old. I had a life, especially with Chiara. Will we feel guilt forever more? Of course, yes. But the truth is I couldn't spend every day with her. And she talks about how ambivalent she was to not be working. She'd been working at her career all her life. She was a speechwriter. She did PR. She was a political being. And the ambivalence of always feeling guilty, whichever you're doing, you feel you should be at the other place. Certainly I felt that. And she's honest about it. Elsewhere she's said, in a poem she once wrote, how else does one make one's needs known if not by first making oneself heard? Be the truth, she wrote. Be the truth, the knife that cuts through the lies. Love it. Love it. Can you imagine, though, somebody who actually has some power now thinking like that? Chirlane McCray is one of our own. And by that I mean she comes out of the women's movement. She was a member of Combahee River Collective when I was a member of which. Combahee River Collective was the first black, feminist, lesbian, radical group in the 60s and 70s. It issued a statement on racism and sexism that became a classic. Out of it, and Barbara Smith's work with it, Barbara Smith's now an assemblywoman in upstate New York. Came Kitchen Table Women of Color Press, which itself created history. Kitchen Table published the first major works by women of color who were feminists. Gloria Anzaldúa, Cherry Moraga, Barbara herself, books like This Bridge Called My Back, books like But Some of Us Were Brave, books that articulated a voice that had simply not been heard before. She was part of all that. And our current First Lady of New York wrote a 5,000-word piece for Essence magazine, which was published in 1979, called I Am a Lesbian. She believed in the politics of identification. She believed in the whole person. She believed that the personal, was political. She's still the same person she always was. She fell in love with him when she was almost 40. They have this family, and she is the most influential voice in the administration, and they're both very proud of that. She had a very strong voice in the hiring of the senior staff, and the senior staff is the most diverse in the history of New York City. Half are women, and of 12 people, only 3 are pale males. You gotta love it. The to-do list that she has devoted herself to impacts heavily on women and on kids, pre-K, basic needs of basic women. I'm really proud that one of our own is in a position of relative power, because power is all relative. But it's one thing to speak truth to power, and it's another thing to have power speak truth to us. Oh my God. She said she was more than a label, and that labels put people in boxes, and the boxes are shaped like coffins. And yes, I'm referring to her as a First Lady, although most of you listeners know that it's not a title that I particularly like. But in this case, because she's so many other firsts, the first black woman in that position, the first feminist woman in that position, the first woman in that position to affirm publicly the complexities of human sexuality and declare herself a whole self. There's so many other firsts going on that why not call her the First Lady of New York too, particularly since it shows RESPECT, and I want her to have every ounce of respect, by God. And now for our first guest. This is a woman who once said, "Closing gender gaps isn't a feeling, it's a quantifiable action." Victoria Budson is the executive director of the Women and Public Policy program at Harvard Kennedy School. Victoria, welcome to the program.
Wonderful to speak with you, Robin. Thank you for having me on.
When many people think of public policy, and the public policy programs, in this case, the one at Harvard Kennedy School that you're the director of, they think it seems very abstract to our real lives, and of course it isn't. So educate us.
Sure, that's a really terrific question. So the Women in Public Policy program focuses on closing gender gaps, and we like to talk about what are called involuntary gender gaps, meaning when we know that there are things that women would like to have in their lives, whether that's being an engineer or being an astronaut or being president of their nation, and they find obstacles towards reaching those goals, and those obstacles extend beyond a limitation of their capability, but instead they encounter structural bias or implicit bias. What our work really does is it focuses on how you close these gaps for women and girls in economic opportunity, political participation, education, and health. One of the things that I will often say is there's no gap that we can't close if we can measure it. Very often when people think about gender bias or a lack of equality for women, they really don't know what to do to change it. And people think it's a problem that is too big to solve.
That's convenient, isn't it?
Well, it is. And I think even good, well-meaning people can find it really challenging to know, what do you do in your own organization or in your own life to make it look different? and the work that we do focuses on two separate things. One is, how do you fix these big systems, whether it's a multinational company, whether it's a government, or whether it's, a small business that one owns. How is it that you can make the institutions in which you live more focused on talent and meritocracy and capacity, and that you can diminish the effects of bias, which really hurt the economic engine and certainly the experience of those who are within those institutions. And then the second piece that we focus on, which I think is always of great interest, as an individual, as a woman, what is it that I can do to help navigate so I can get up, over, around, or through any type of challenge that I might come to?
Yes.
And so once we get down to this really brass tacks, useful level, now I can explain what it is we actually do at the Women in Public Policy program, which is we create interventions to help women do that and to help individuals reshape institutions. And an intervention is an action that can be taken. And we study those, and we mostly look at what is called experimental design. So real-world issues that have been tested in the real world, as well as some which have been tested in the lab. And we end up with a number of different things which we know work. And then we talk about those and figure them out. And ideally, we focus on replicable interventions, those things which can be done in lots of places to good impact, and those which are what we call scalable, something which can really be broadly applied so that if you and I were to have the same conversation in 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years, the landscape of what women have to overcome would be diminished.
I bet you have a for instance. Give us an example.
I'd love to. Amy Cuddy did a wonderful piece of research which really shows that when one is a new mother, even when your behaviors have changed in no way in the workplace, you're viewed as more absent and less engaged.
God.
Yeah. When you're still coming to work the same amount, performing the same amount, have the same amount of face time. And it's because there's a cultural narrative, and people are really seen through that filter. Now, when a man in the workplace has a child and his behaviors change in no ways, he is also viewed differently. He gets what we call a relational bonus. He is viewed as a nicer guy.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And he's also considered more committed to the organization, and that's because it really focuses on the breadwinner model.
Wow.
And what we know from our labor statistics is that, nearly 50% of all families have women who are a breadwinner that is primary and essential to the family.
That's right.
Or one or the other. And this notion that women's wages are extra and less needed for that woman is incorrect.
Yep.
Less needed for that family is incorrect. And less needed for that community and economic system is incorrect.
Right. So we've got to get rid of that notion. It's still virulent.
Yeah, and it's completely false. Now, the reason that it's great to know how one is perceived differently is because you can do something about it once you know. And once women know that they may be viewed differently in the workplace when they return, they can then create their own narrative and talk with their employer, they can talk with their colleagues to say, I'm really engaged, I'm looking forward to the next big challenge, because the pathway to promotion is stretch assignments.
Sure.
And when people are viewed as more absent and less engaged, they are not given stretch assignments.
Right. Public policy. Because these things do affect real people's real lives.
And their everyday lives.
Yeah.
Their everyday lives. And there's only two things which really can give women equality, anywhere in the world, by the way. The first is statutory protections, just what you're talking about. Protections which require that men and women be paid equally for the same work. Protections which mean women can have access to capital. Protections such that it is the law that women should have bodily integrity.
Right.
It is these types of statutory protections which are critical, but can also be rolled back at any point. All legal framework is shiftable and changeable, even when it's in the Constitution.
Right.
The second is for a woman to have the ability to economically sustain herself over the arc of her adult life, whether or not she exercises that.
Right.
But if one cannot leave one's situation and support oneself and one's dependents, one is really unlikely to be able to build a life of real equality.
That's right. That's right.
And when we focus on public policy, what we're really doing is trying to create a framework where, one, equality is required, and then there's legal recourse, but two, systems which lead us towards equality rather than away.
Mm-hmm.
For example, Iris Bennett, who is the academic dean at the Kennedy School, has done a wonderful piece of work looking at joint versus separate evaluation. Now, what that really means is whenever someone goes for a job interview, if just one person is being looked at for that position, which is very common in institutions when one is doing promotion, that person is really being interviewed looking at their own skills, and then that set of skills is being compared to whoever the average worker is, the usual worker. So if we were looking at the engineering field, that would be an older white male.
Sure.
And then people are just filtering the person being interviewed against the norm in their mind.
Right.
But when you're interviewing a group of people, and so that 5 or 6 candidates are interviewed over time, then you're comparing actual skill sets of a real person to actual skill sets of another person. And the bias that one has of really seeking whoever the norm is in that job goes away.
Of course.
It doesn't cost the employer significantly more. If one was going to interview multiple candidates, it costs them nothing. And what one finds is that when one is hiring in bundles, think of when a law firm brings in 20 new associates. People are cognizant that we don't want an exact replication of the same skill set, the same demographics, the same fields that they've been through. But when one hires one at a time, you tend to be hiring whatever the favorite is for that thing.
Of course.
And it's really about hiring, retention, and promotion. And here's the thing, you know, we usually hear people talk about this in relation to what it means towards the individual woman. But if you think of what a company spends to hire and train a worker, when that worker, who has already been invested in by that institution, is not then fully utilized, and their talent isn't fully actualized by having them promoted, doing more responsible work over time, that in essence is leaving money on the table.
Of course.
One really has to understand this isn't about individual women. This is about our prosperity as a nation.
Of course.
And about the economic effectiveness of each individual institution of it.
Of course. What wonderful work you do. You really do. To my frustration, we have to go, but you are doing superb work. Thank you for it, and thanks so much for being with us on Women's Media Center Live.
My pleasure.
It's time for a short break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and when we return, we'll be talking with an academic whose work, I think, every gender studies program in this country and the world ought to emulate. Back in just a moment.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 CBS Radio.
Welcome back. Our next guest, Dr. Juanita Johnson-Bailey, is the author of Sisters in College, Making a Way Out of No Way, the book that received the Philip Franzen Award for Literature in Continuing Higher Education and the Sadie Mossel Alexander Award for Outstanding Scholarship in Black Women's Studies. She's also the co-editor of Flat-Footed Truths, Telling Black Women's Lives, and the Handbook of Race in Adult Education. Dr. Johnson-Bailey is the director of the Institute for Women's Studies at the University of Georgia. Welcome, Dr. Johnson-Bailey. Welcome to the program. And may I call you Juanita?
Please call me Juanita, and thank you so much. I'm happy to be with you.
Well, I am such a fan, as you know, but for the benefit of the listeners, I spoke recently at University of Georgia, Athens campus, And I was sponsored by the Institute for Women's Studies, of which you are the head. And I was blown away. Just the room was packed. I think hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people showed up. The energy was so high, you could have lit a city block. There was not just token representation by African American feminism, but it was really critical mass. It was feminism, too, with a capital F. And I remember asking you at the reception and thinking, I've got to get her on the program because I want to know how you're doing it. Every other place, or most other places I speak at, women's studies has been subsumed into some vague academic category, usually called gender and sexuality studies, as if there wasn't enough to study about women, I might add. And it suffers from that subsumation. This is very clearly and proudly women's studies. I want to know how you did it, how you are turning out these amazing students, and I want everybody to copy you. That's what I want.
Well, thank you so much. And let me just say, it has been a struggle. I've been with the Institute since 1995, and what attracted me to the Institute and to women's studies at the University of Georgia was that it was so diverse.
Uh-huh.
I have considered myself a feminist since I first heard the term, and I was 15 at the time, and I'm 60 now, so it's been quite a while, and it just filled me up. And it excited me, and I thought, this is it. This is what I've seen my mother live. This is what I've seen my grandmother live. I'm at home. And I remember I was, the first time I actually heard about a text about feminism that connected to me was the Wallace text on the myth of the super black woman. I know I'm corrupting the name, but that's how I remember it.
Michelle Wallace, but Black Macho and the Myth of the Superwoman. I remember it well, yeah.
Yes. I was actually being wheeled to surgery and looking at television at Phil Donahue when I heard that text, and I told him, wait a minute, let me write that down, because I'm not going to remember it after surgery. I wrote it down, I ordered the text when I was back on my feet and read it, and it was just wonderful. And so, and years later, when I was actually in a doctoral program, I stumbled across the women's studies program, and people kept saying, "Don't go in that direction. It's all a white girl's thing. You don't need it." And I never believed that because of how I was raised and the really controversial, dynamic nuns that I had in Catholic school. I knew that there was a common ground amongst women, and that was a common ground that had saved me and had gotten me to where I was. So when I came across this program at UGA, it was so diverse and so exciting. The director, Pat Del Rey, directed the program in such a way that no group was ever forgotten, that the category of woman was an expansive, comprehensive category. And so when I became director, there was actually a move afoot to change it to gender and sexuality studies.
Uh-oh.
And in my interview with the dean, she asked me about that, and I just, stepped out on a limb and said, I'm totally opposed to that. I think the category of woman is comprehensive. It's a big umbrella, and from what I've seen at women's studies at UGA, everyone's under that umbrella. And knowing, just being at the age that I am, I've seen Chicano studies and African American studies subsumed under ethnic studies.
Exactly.
And that political edge, that mission is lost.
Yep.
And I was just afraid that would happen to us, and so I resisted. And mind you, it didn't make me very popular, but
I bet not.
No. And when I go to the National Women's Studies Association conference, we're one of the few programs that still have the name Women's Studies, and quite often I'm challenged about that as to, but what's your theoretical, what's your philosophical base? How is it you don't get the importance of? And I just stop people and say, I get the importance, but I also get the idea or the notion of having a political base that that centers women and doesn't put us to the side.
Oh, I think I'm in love. I mean, no, really, I swear, it's just amazing. I mean, because the subsumation of what is half of humanity, just like, you're absolutely right, the subsumation of the individuation of Chicana studies, of African American studies, and suddenly vanishing into ethnic, is really reactionary, and it so much of this politics, by which I mean the outs trying to make the pale males understand that we're all human. Yeah. To shorthand it, so much of this it has to do with visibility, with naming, with saying, I am here, I exist, I have a different reality. It enriches, in fact, it doesn't necessarily threaten. And so when that visibility is disvisibled, again, to coin a word, it undercuts everything we do. And it's the way that I think deconstructionism has played out, however it may have begun, but the way it's played out in practice as depoliticizing. Yes. and very, very reactionary. Yes. Do you think that there's any chance of the success of the program that you lead and inspire catching fire elsewhere, and instead of being the outlier, being the model?
Well, I certainly hope so. I know the young women that we're sending out from the program get it. And what has been so affirming for me is that we have so many women of color who come into the Institute for Women's Studies and who then go on to be professors in this pipeline that we have. And they have said to me individually and collectively, thank you so much for being this place where we can find a place, because we've taken classes in African American studies and we get a mention there.
Right.
We have taken classes, gender classes in journalism, and we get that they look at gender as a very catch-all category where
right.
we have to talk masculinity, we have to talk femininity, but here we found a place. And so I'm hoping that pipeline, I'm hoping that little sort of ripple will have an effect. But I will say that I'm not very hopeful.
Wow.
I'm not very hopeful because we find that there's a debate, particularly amongst our third wave feminist students, where they're resistant to the idea. They really think that we've been there, done that, and don't get that we're still doing that, and that this is the way the power co-opts.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
You're being co-opted, and now there's a move afoot with our transgender students who want us to change it to either women's studies and sexuality, or gender and sexuality, or and we're resisting that, and we keep saying you have to understand that you have a place here. That's why you come here in such large numbers, because it is the way that we have operationalized this that has let you know that you're welcome.
Yes,
and so there's no need to reinvent what is working quite well.
And there seems to be a lack of understanding on people's part that, feminism in its successive hundreds and hundreds of waves has been trying, basically, to be very reductionist about it, to have women define for ourselves who we are. And that is not, I might add, solely in terms of our sexuality.
No, it is not.
That's been a major theme. Hello, we are not the farmer's daughter. We are not sex pots. We are not just housewives. We are not just mothers. We are not just this. We are not. We are entire human beings, and very complex ones. And so when you do gender and sexuality, you are, in a sense, undoing some of that work. And there seems to be a complete tin ear about that.
You're lifting up one dimension of us. You're elevating that dimension above others.
That's right.
And yes, and of course I've had people say, well, when you study women, why not, women and families? And it's like, we're not just that.
That's right.
And our families aren't always the biological extensions of us. Our families are multidimensional. They're our friends. They're our sisters. So it's interesting that people don't see this as an assault, which is how I see it. It's a sleight of hand to get us to disempower ourselves. And I just refuse to do that.
Oh, God, I'm definitely in love.
I have to admit that it was our founding director, Patricia Del Rey, who actually hired me to create a course for the Women's Studies program called Multicultural Perspectives on Women's Lives. Mm-hmm. And this was her way of saying to the entire campus, Women's Studies is about all women. It has remained our most popular course, and we've run over 10,000 students through that course. Students of all races. We have about 25% male students who come through that course. And so I think that course has had a real impact.
Thank you so much for what you do. I'm going to stay in touch and not let go of you. And thank you also for being with us on Women's Media Center Live.
Thank you so much for having me. I have enjoyed it. You're quite welcome.
And now it's time for some news you can use. I'm not sure exactly how you're going to use this, but it is going to be useful to you if you're a woman, and in fact even if you're a man. At last, federal health officials are finally correcting a long-standing gender imbalance in laboratory research on potential drug treatments. For at least 20 years, federal law has already required that women be included in clinical studies that are funded by the National Institutes of Health, because drugs often have vastly different effects in men and women. So as a result, more than half of the participants in NIH-funded clinical research are women. But that isn't always actually the way it plays out. Furthermore, there's been no similar requirement to eliminate the bias from more basic laboratory research that leads up to clinical trials, or that can doom a drug to the discard pile if it seems not to be working before it even gets to the clinical trial. So now this is now going to change. Top NIH officials announced last month that the agency will soon require researchers who apply for grants to balance male and female cells and lab animals, unless there's good reason to include only one sex. That would be, for example, if it was a study of ovarian cancer or of prostate cancer, you would go obviously with the gender affected. The new rules will have a really remarkable effect on how laboratory research is conducted, because the NIH is a major funder of biomedical research all around the world, not just in this country. Meanwhile, interestingly enough, a bipartisan group of 15 female senators, goddess bless them, has expressed concern that women and minorities are still not adequately represented in clinical trials, despite these 2 decades that I spoke of earlier, because it doesn't always shake down in reality. So the group called for the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, to require more women and minorities in industry-sponsored clinical trials, which have lagged behind the federal effort. That, of course, means a bit of regulation, which will drive the right wing crazy. But this is a real step in the right direction, and our lives ultimately depend on it. We have another short pause coming up. I'm Robin Morgan, and this is Women's Media Center Live. When we return, we'll talk with a researcher who was the first person, it could be said, to take sexual exploitation seriously enough to study it.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 CBS Radio.
And we're back again. Melisa Farley is an American clinical psychologist and researcher, best known for her studies of the effects of prostitution, trafficking, and sexual violence. She is the titan looming over the field. Welcome, Melisa, to Women's Media Center Live.
Thank you so much, Robin. It's good to be here.
Well, it's about time. We've done a lot of shows on the sexual exploitation of women, the linked industry of prostitution, pornography, and trafficking. But I realized we hadn't gone to the source, as it were, to you and the amazing work that you do with the Institute, with Prostitution Research and Education. And so it's about time.
Well, thanks. I mean, we've been around for about 18 years. We were set up to do research for the purpose of social change. And not just kind of average surveys, but research that would pass muster in peer-reviewed journals. Mm-hmm. Thereby being good enough to drive policy and legislation and that people can use.
You were just a mild-mannered American clinical psychologist and researcher, right?
I got dragged into this not knowing much at all about prostitution and not talking about prostitution because I was intimidated by sex worker folks who said, "Well, if you haven't been there, you can't say anything about it because we love it. So shut up, you nasty feminist."
Right.
And then I got a phone call from a woman who was on a task force for prostitution that had been set up, and unbeknownst to me at the time, it was stacked by folks like Coyote and decriminalization advocates. And they wanted to kick her off. Her name was Norma Hotaling. Mm-hmm. They wanted to kick her off because she was saying very bad things about prostitution, like she was talking about how a pimp kicked her in the head and caused her to have a concussion and had to have brain surgery. And so I was asked to write a letter supporting her staying on the task force, and I thought, gee, that sounds like a good idea. I can do that.
Yeah, sure.
Wrote her a letter, got to know her, and that's 18 years later.
Wow. People
are operating with very bad information in this area.
Yes, and the spin room of the sex industry. They have the money and they have the smarts to have put a very sophisticated spin. They came up with the phrase "sex work," and so they've promulgated that over the years. And all we have is the suffering of survivors and feminists trying to listen to them and support them. So, but tell about the
facts.
And excuse me.
We do have these little facts on our site.
That's
Robin.
right. They are entitled to their opinions, but they are not entitled to their own facts. You're quite correct.
I mean, for example, people don't know right now that when folks who are advocating the decriminalization or legalization of prostitution say, "Oh, well, yes, there's a few of those poor trafficked people, but most women choose it." That's absolutely a lie.
Of course it is.
We've done surveys recently that shows that 84% of people who are in prostitution are controlled by third parties. Mm-hmm. That's trafficking.
Of course it is. And also when they take the position, as some organizations do, that, we're against, some of the human rights organizations, we're against child prostitution, but adult women have a right to choose, etc. They're overlooking the fact that, I'm speaking to the woman herself, I better get my stats correct, but you'll correct me if I'm wrong. Something close to 90 or maybe even 95% of the women in prostitution entered as minors.
A great majority, yes, that's true.
So if you've been either trafficked or you're a runaway who gets seduced into this when you're 14, where is the choice? There's no real choice. Anyway, go on.
It's so bad for a 16-year-old. Why is it so great for an 18-year-old?
Precisely.
That doesn't even make sense.
Precisely. One of the sections of the website of the Prostitution Research and Education Center is myths about prostitution, which is so eye-opening. I couldn't recommend it more to listeners who have not thought about this or have begun to think about it now.
It shows how much we've been subjected to the propaganda of the sex industry to the point where people actually believe it's mostly voluntary and it's a choice.
Yeah.
In fact, it isn't. It isn't, and that people don't really get hurt really, really badly on all levels, emotional as well as physical, in prostitution.
Yeah.
But what we did is, Norma and I started interviewing women in San Francisco because we got pissed that all this misinformation was coming out of this task force. And they were refusing, by the way, the data that I showed them from the early feminist organizations like Whisper, Women Hurt in Systems of Prostitution.
Yes.
Engaged in revolt.
I remember Whisper, yeah.
Out of Minnesota, and then also the Council for Prostitution Alternatives in Portland, Oregon. I offered them this material in the early 90s, and they just, no, we don't want to see that. It's still happening when you offer task forces on prostitution information from survivors who are out and speaking about it.
They don't want to hear it.
They don't want to hear it, no.
Yeah.
In prostitution, just about every bad thing that men can do to women happens.
Yes.
Incest, battering, abandonment, neglect, verbal abuse.
Sure.
But what makes it possible in men's minds to buy another human being for sex? Even when this guy, for example, might oppose racism or state-sponsored torture, but he still thinks it's okay to buy sex.
Right. Right.
So we got curious about that and started interviewing Johns.
Yeah, that's a fascinating study. I mean, look at Elliot Spitzer, who was a crusading district attorney, who was, Mr. Clean, who was this major figure and had a great political career ahead of him, and who briefly was the governor, patronizing, quote, call girls, unquote.
Well, Spitzer, like a lot of Johns, compartmentalizes this little section.
You think?
You know what, Robin? You wrote that years and years and years ago in The Demon Lover, that compartmentalization is a cornerstone of patriarchy.
The connections are studiously avoided.
The connections are avoided and outright denied.
It was you who came up with the facts on PTSD, that women in the life suffer higher rates of post-traumatic stress than soldiers in combat.
Comparable.
Oh, okay.
As high as.
All right.
As vets who are coming right back from war zones. We got some of the highest rates of PTSD psychologists have ever seen.
Yeah, I'm
sure. It's not just an expression that it's a war zone between men and women in prostitution.
Melisa, say a word or two, and then unfortunately our time is winding down. But say a word or two about what you found in your study on the men who buy sex. Who are these men?
Well, first of all, they're not all men. This is another myth that's put out there that, everybody buys sex. A lot of men don't.
Good.
And they don't for really good reasons. And it was really important to me to find that out and to hear men talk about why they didn't want to use women in prostitution. The guys who buy sex are not just pathetic guys who need to get laid. They really aren't. They have more ominous attitudes than that. They are pretty misogynist. They really think they're entitled to 24/7 access to women. We would love to have some funders come on board and partner with us we want to do a study of cell phone trafficking. We want to compare Oakland, California with Cape Town, South Africa. We want to look at the racism in both places. We're ready to roll with these and just don't have... We're really pretty modest in our funding requests. So
give the
we'd love to hear from anybody.
Give the website.
Prostitutionresearch.com. And if you put the word prostitution in Google, we're going to come up pretty fast. Then you can get to us through our website.
It's just remarkable work that you do. It's a great service, and it is scrupulous research and takes enormous time and care, and I want you to know how grateful we are. So that's prostitutionresearch.com. Go to the website, check it out, educate yourself, equip yourself with great arguing tools for other people. And if you have an extra penny or dime or know people who want this to end, that's one place that would be an extremely good place to put it. Thank you so much for being with us today, Melisa.
Thanks for having me on the show, Robin.
One more quick break here at Women's Media Center Live, where I am still, surprise, Robin Morgan. When we come back, it'll be time for Fighting Words.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 CBS Radio.
Welcome back to Fighting Words. So last week, 7 people, including the gunman himself, were killed by a 22-year-old man on a rampage. His name was Elliot Rodger, and he was the shooter in Isla Vista, California. And expectably, there were the usual analyses about gun control, which we should have in this country, and about better care for mental illness, which we should have in this country. But at first, at least, what got lost was the virulence of the woman hatred. I wrote about this in The Demon Lover, this toxic climate of male supremacy and woman hatred that so saturates our culture that it's hard to even see. More recently, Soraya Chemaly wrote a brilliant piece about this shooter in XO Jane. Here's the reality. There are 12 murder-suicides a week, and women are 85% of those killed, and men are 95% of those doing the killing. There are at least 3 women who die violent deaths every single day because men are angry. There are 66,000 calls a day to domestic shelters from mostly women begging for help. There are 160 million women missing on this planet. 40% of mass shootings begin with acts of domestic violence, and all but one in the last 30 years were by men. In 2006, a man named Charles Roberts, a truck driver, walked into an Amish schoolhouse in a community where 20 years earlier a girl had slighted him, and he took offense. So he ordered the boys in the classroom to leave, and he demanded that the 11 girls line up and face the blackboard, and he shot them each to death in the back of the head. In 1989, a man named Marc Lepin, who had been non-admitted to an engineering school, walked into a class for engineers in a Montreal Polytechnique school and screamed, "It's the women I've come for. You're all effing feminists. I'm against feminism. That's why I'm here." And he killed 14 women. In 2013, Norwegian mass shooter Anders Breivik killed 77 people, with anti-feminism a strong part of his manifesto, though it got buried in his other ranting about immigrants and Islamophobia, and what got overlooked was that he was Islamophobic and hated immigrants because he thought they might have at women's bodies, and he was obsessed with who controlled women's reproductive lives. He said that feminism would deny the intrinsic worth of native Christian European heterosexual males, that the fate of European civilization depends on European men steadfastly resisting politically correct feminism. Consider that in the context of a quote from Elliot Rodger, the California shooter. Quote, "Women have control over which men get sex and which men don't, thus having control over which men breed and which men don't. Feminism is evil. Feminism gave women the power over the future of the human species. He also visited what are called PUA hate sites. PUA, P-U-A, stands for pickup artists. Now, there are websites that tell men how to pick up women and get women. And then there are PUA hate websites for men who seem unable to do that. So he would visit PUA hate sites with other discontent men who couldn't get women and had this sense of entitlement that they deserved any woman they chose. And he would urge other so-called incels, that stands for involuntary celibates, to fight back. Quote, "One day, incels will realize our true strength in numbers and will overthrow this oppressive feminist system. Start envisioning a world where," and these three words are in all capital letters, "women fear you." This is a man who wanted to put women in concentration camps and starve them, he wrote. Well, we already fear them. In a week or two that have brought us Boko Haram and Jill Abramson's firing and the battle for equal pay being resisted and more evidence that we're in a backlash, we might as well realize that we are. And it's a backlash like we haven't experienced before. It's a backlash that has to do with women gaining a toehold, however small, on some kind of relative minuscule power. Being at the top of the masthead of the New York Times, getting an education if you're a girl in Africa, fighting for equal pay. All these things are part of the threat that apparently we pose. And the threat is real. They are right when they name it. We've said all along that it has to do with reproduction and controlling reproduction, and now they're actually admitting it. There were sites that declared Elliot Rodger a hero on Facebook before feminist pressure made them take it down. I think there's another element to the backlash, which is that just as there was a new rising of racism, which didn't surprise people of color, and didn't surprise those of us who are not of color but are paying attention, a new rise of racism when Barack Obama began running, and then when he won. Similarly, I think there's a new rise of sexism at just the phantom specter of the possibility that Hillary will declare and will run. So that's the bad news, and it's serious. The most dangerous time for a battered woman is when she gets ready to leave. And we're on our way. The good news, however, is that this has now, because of feminist pressure, entered the public discourse. Because men were setting up hashtags that said, hashtag not all men, very defensively. We're not doing this. Not all of us are like this. Before men began writing more sensibly about this, women set up a hashtag, yes, all women. And that hashtag trended and has been one of the most visited and used hashtags in the history of Twitter. I haven't heard the word feminism used affirmatively so much as I have in the past weeks. This has now entered public discourse, male violence against women, and what women are doing about it. So maybe it's like the Chinese character for catastrophe, which also means opportunity. And that's it for this week. You've been listening to us on CBS Radio, WJFK 1580 AM, or visiting us at WMClive.com for this and for a whole archive of our previous episodes. Be sure to find WMC Live on Facebook, Twitter, and at iTunes worldwide, where you can stream, download, and subscribe to the show's podcast. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Views expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. WMC President and Executive Producer of this program, Julie Burton, Senior Producer, Crystal Williams-Chancellor, and our founding sponsor, Regina K. Scully. I'm Robin Morgan. Thank you for being with us. Join us next week when 4-time Grammy-nominated jazz singer-songwriter and feminist Karen Allison will be here, along with Heather Arnay, producer of the new film Madame Presidenta, Why Not U.S., and award-winning journalist Lynn Scher, author of the new book on astronaut Sally Ride. Only here on Women's Media Center Live.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, tune your radio to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 CBS Radio and WMCLive.com. Talk radio with a brain.